Welcome back. Honduras faces political crisis 3 days after a coup which forced its president into exile. Coup leaders have been given 72 hours to reinstate the ousted leader, who's vowed to return home this weekend. From Pittsburgh, I'm joined by Jose Rene Argueta, who works as a research consultant to the Latin American Public Opinion Project of Vanderbilt University. Dr. Argueta has conducted several studies on the Honduran political system. In the studio with me is Alvaro Vargas Llosa, Senior Fellow of the Center on Global Prosperity at the Independent Institute. He's widely published and has written several books, including Liberty for Latin America. As we get back, Alvaro, if I can put this Facebook question to you, please. It came in from Imran Ali, who says, even if the democratic process is allegedly being circumvented by Zelaya, it seems that the Supreme Court had no jurisdiction to make a ruling on a referendum. This is a legal issue. That's what the courts are for. So take us through what the big issue is here. It seems people are a little confused over what the rights were.
It did have jurisdiction, actually. I mean, the problem is this, that there's a constitution, obviously, that's been in existence for now decades, since 1982. And that constitution bars any change to the constitution with regard to certain articles, including the term limits of the president. That's a very, very clear statement in the constitution. It also has a process for changing other articles of the constitution, not that one, which cannot be changed or modified. And the way to do that, it very clearly states, is Congress. So referenda are not acceptable as a means of changing the constitution. So obviously the courts have been applying this sort of legal structure to step in. What can be brought into question is whether it was right for the military, and I don't think it was, but there are people who in Tegucigalpa are saying that it was, to step in at this stage in the process, because there was an impeachment process that could have gone on in the Congress, and I think that would have been the appropriate way to act. What happened was the military took the signal that the courts were sending to act and say, we have this sort of legal cover. What was not allowed to run its course was the procedure in Congress, which I personally think, and others think, outside of Honduras would have been the appropriate way, so that you don't have the military intervening at this stage and turning this into a coup. Right.
We've got a call actually from Germany. Rafael is on the line with us. Rafael, what would you like to add?
Actually, first, if I may be allowed to make a comment.
Please.
It seems to me that the President, Mr. Zelaya's only problem was that he called for a referendum. All the opposition had to do is defeat the referendum, and that would have been the end of the problem, right? Now, on the other hand, when one of your panelists claims that he was appalled with the military dictatorships in the 60s, the 70s, I think he said the 70s and the 80s, and now he says, I support the armed forces intervening. Well, are we going to have there the armed forces as the final referees in the political game in Latin America?
Well, let me get Dr. Argueta's response first, and then I can get my guest in the studio involved as well.
No, definitely not. And I'm very, very opposed to any military dictatorship or any dictatorship in Honduras or in anywhere in the world. So we know how bad they are. And my point is that in this case, it is not a military dictatorship taking place in Honduras. And the actions of the military were totally legal according to Article 313 of the Constitution. And the thing is that, everybody in the world know how bad the military dictatorships are, and everybody opposes that. And in Latin America in particular, we have a very long history of that kind of governments, and everybody is afraid that that might happen in the other Latin American countries. But in this case, as I mentioned before, this is not a military coup d'etat in which the military are going to seize power. So it's more what in the Spanish tradition is called a pronunciamiento, in which the military ousted the incumbent and give power to another civil government, which is allowed by Article 242 of the Honduran Constitution. So everything that has been done in Honduras has been completely legal and according to the Constitution. So when
Go ahead. I was going to just ask Mr. Yosa here on this issue. Even President Obama has been very wary about calling it a coup. Now he's saying it sets a terrible precedent. But what do you make of the fact that even America doesn't really know what to do?
Well, the problem is this: there's a wider context in Latin America where you have a sort of block of countries led, obviously, by President Hugo Chavez from Venezuela, who are trying to expand the revolution, the so-called Bolivarian revolution, to other countries. And obviously, they were a very big presence in Honduras because they had managed to get Zelaya to be part of that whole sort of group of, or block of countries. So in that sort of wider context, the referendum was perceived by many in Honduras and many outside of Honduras, including probably the American government. That's why the response has been what it has been, as an attempt by this bloc to basically control the political situation there. So I think what Obama is trying to do is, how do I denounce the coup? How do I make very clear that I am not in favor of the military stepping back into Latin American politics, and at the same time not hand the country over to Chavez, and be very careful to point out that we do not want people changing the constitutions to re-elect themselves forever, because that's the kind of autocratic populist trend that's now in vogue in many countries, and I don't think the United States wants that.
Now, what do you make of Rafael's comment that if they had just gone through the process of the referendum, the opposition with Mr. Zelaya's rating so low in the polls, I think 30% or so, that he could have been defeated in the referendum?
That is true, but it's also true that there is a constitution and there are laws, and the laws bar the president from calling a referendum to change the constitution. So it's very important to have the law as a sort of guiding and presiding principle, and the politics to be sort of subjected to that law, because if you turn things around, then you could open the can of worms. I mean,
Dr. Argueta, there's a question we got from our live station chat room. People are online around the world chatting on this issue as we go out live. And Dan in Houston, Texas says, do any of the guests suspect that Manuel Zelaya was overthrown by Western powers because of his current policies mirroring those of Hugo Chavez?
No, no, definitely not. I don't believe that the U.S. or any Western power had any interference with that. This is a 100% Honduran decision, based in part, I believe, because of the fear of having Hondurans become a Venezuela without oil, by the way, but also because of the actions of President Zelaya themselves, who wanted to go beyond above the law. So, and maybe because of our tradition of military dictatorships or authoritarian governments and in existence of the rule of law in Honduras, we Hondurans are very aware of how important the rule of law is, and we don't want presidents to be above the law, because that has been very common in Honduras. And that's why the Honduran Constitution of 1982 has been reformed almost every year. And there have been several reforms that have limited the power of the executive and the armed forces, and try to make the country, the Honduran democracy, more democratic.
Mr. Yosa, a live station question here from Marston in Massachusetts here in the U.S. And of course, taking into account the economic situation of Honduras is not so good. And the World Bank has said it will also block loans and so on. The question from Marston says, what actions could the international community take against the new government once the OAS deadline has been reached?
Well, they already said what they're going to do. They spelled out what they're going to do. They're going to suspend Honduras from the OAS, and that has a whole host of consequences. And both the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank have also said they're going to freeze all sorts of aid and loans and so on. But apart from that, there's not much they're going to really...
What is the impact of being suspended from the OAS?
It's more symbolic. It's more political than economic, really. I mean, Honduras is a poor country. Yes, it is dependent to a certain extent on aid, but not that much. And it basically relies on exports of coffee, bananas, a little bit of maquila. That's a growing part of the economy, but it's not as big yet. I don't think this is going to be really an economic issue. It's more a political issue. All these organizations, what they're trying to do is send a signal to Honduras to pressure the Honduran government into finding a democratic solution, negotiating a way out.
Okay. David in Germany, your question, please. Thanks for being with us.
Hello. I just want to point something very special, but I have the feeling that it has been not mentioned.
Okay.
According also to the Constitution in Honduras, the president of the Congress doesn't have the possibility to reach for the presidential house. And this is a very small detail which has not been mentioned. But the main detractor of Mr. Zelaya is Mr. Micheletti, the actual, I will say, president-in-act. But according to the Constitution, he should not be there also.
Okay, Dr. Argueta, what do you make of that?
Yeah, what the Constitution says in, I believe, is Article 239, is that the President of Congress cannot run for President of the country, being President of Congress, nor the Vice President or, judges of the Supreme Court and many other, public officials. But also the Article 242 clearly establishes that in the absence of the President, in this case, President Zelaya, the person that is going to be the president, the titular of the president, or the executive is going to be the vice president, but Zelaya's vice president renounced a couple of months ago because he is running for president himself. So the same article stipulates that in that case, so it's the President of Congress the one that has to perform as president.
Just less than a minute to go. If I could ask you here, Mr. Yosa, the issue that's been brought up about President Zelaya being involved in drugs passing through the country and so on, how serious are these? Are these just a detraction from the actual case?
That's what it looks like. I mean, at this point, nobody outside of the government that's putting out this information has any real information. Clearly, the American authorities don't have that information yet. I think this is simply trying to build a case and trying to sort of stem this international pressure that's coming onto Honduras at this point. It may develop into something more. We just don't have any elements to judge by at this point, other than what we're hearing from them, from the government.
Well, of course, I think everyone's going to be watching the situation very closely. I thank you both for joining us. Dr. Argueta, thank you as well there from Pittsburgh.
Thank you
for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us with your questions. On the next show, we take a look at the changing face of America's pro-Israel lobby and its recent willingness to support President Obama as he takes a tougher stance than previous U.S. administrations on issues such as Israeli settlements. Do send in your questions and your thoughts for that. But from me and the team, until then, we'll see you next time.